everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of Proustian Paths, the podcast that takes you on a gentle walk through the text of a classic work of French literature, Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. I am Dr James Holden, and I'm your tour guide for this literary journey. Along the way, I'll be offering you a view of all the novel's key moments, so that if you're a first-time reader, you'll be able to see them from their best vantage points, or if you're already a dedicated Proustian, you'll get a different perspective on the people and places you already know. Today, we'll be looking at Swann's exclusion from the Verdurin social circle, a performance of the Moonlight Sonata played in the dark, and at the mutability of social truths as exposed by Swann's jealousy. But before we get into that, I want to say welcome back to the podcast. It's been a while, during which time I have, like Proust's narrator, taken my own detour, largely through the French language, which I have learnt since recording the last episode. I'd especially like to thank long-time listeners to the podcast who have again waited so patiently for this new episode, and who have continued to engage on social media. If you don't follow the show, let me take this opportunity to say that there is now a Proustian Paths Substack. This is the place where, freed from the clearly defined pathways of the podcast, I offer my own personal reflections on life and literature, starting from the works of Proust. You can subscribe to the Substack for free to get all the posts direct to your inbox. As a free subscriber, you can also access subscriber chat, where those of us walking along the Proustian paths can come together and share our journey in a welcoming and inclusive environment. To subscribe, visit proustianpaths.substack.com or follow the links in the show's socials. In today's episode, we'll be continuing our gentle walk through Swann in Love. The section we're looking at here begins on page 286 in the English translation published by Penguin, when Swann finds himself not invited to a Verdurin soirée, and continues up to the line break that occurs on page 292. This is a shorter section than I had previously suggested. In fact, I've decided to cover shorter sections of text in each episode, partly so that I can, when I choose, be more granular in my response, but more importantly, as a way of making the podcast more manageable for myself. We'll begin, as ever, by drawing a quick map of the literary terrain here. Then we'll add a few landmarks so we can orientate ourselves better. Finally, we'll take in the literary view. The literary map. We're traversing a small section of text today, a mere 6 pages, and in so doing we're not covering, or so it would seem, much new ground. However, the passage does include an act of traversal. More, it focuses on mapping out, or more precisely remapping, not a physical space but a social space. This means that we're looking at a vertical human geography, as opposed to a horizontal landscape. We begin in the Bois de Boulogne in Paris, where the Verdurins have held a dinner. It's the end of the evening, and everyone is getting ready to leave when Swann overhears discussions of another gathering that will be taking place tomorrow at Chatou. Now, we do not, in the course of the following pages, go to this place. However, we see the party through the lens of Swann's imagination. So, cut out of any real map, this place assumes a symbolic place that is located in opposition to the Verdurin house, Swann's own home, or indeed any other space where he may have access to Odette. In essence, this space is located according to his jealousy, which draws its own map and populates it with actors. The Verdurins leave in their carriage with both Odette and Forcheville, while Swann, refusing his own carriage, decides to walk back to his home through the Bois de Boulogne, talking out loud to himself as he goes, allowing his jealousy to express itself. The Bois is a space now crossed, as it were, by Swann's way, or at least his way takes him across it. The Bois is, of course, a space that resonates throughout the search. It is one in which we will again encounter Odette, in her later guise as Madame Swann, out for her walks where she'll be observed by the narrator who, Swann-like, goes there to see her. This evening, the one we're focusing on today, with its leavings and traversals, also marks the closing off of a path, the limiting of a way, for Swann's way no longer, from this moment onwards, leads to the Verdurin salon. The last phrase in the section we're covering today reads, quote, "Swann was never mentioned again at the Verdurins." In many ways, to draw a map of this short section is a challenge, because it is a place that exists in the dark. Swann leaves in the dark. He imagines Chateau in the dark the following evening, where the pianist will play the Moonlight Sonata, quote, in the dark, so that the lovers, so he believes, can be together, so they can, quote, dream together. A map here is one drawn by the mind's eye, in the imagination, as much by jealousy as by the cartographer's gaze. Literary landmarks. There are just a few physical and conceptual landmarks that we might mark on our map to help orientate ourselves in this short section of our journey. Firstly, we might notice how our maps are redrawing themselves, and that places formerly connected are drifting apart, rendering our former signposts useless, as they now point to dead ends and failed relationships. Our former landmarks are being uprooted. Secondly, we might want to think of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, a work that is in reality his Sonata for Piano Opus 27 No. 2, which he composed in 1801 and published the following year. Proust no doubt deploys the work in this scene for its ambience and the association with moonlight, which was not the composer's own, and which Proust wanted to borrow for the affair between Odette and Forcheville. Beyond this, though, the work acts as an important reference, and one that, with the fabric of musical references in this broader passage, can help orientate us. The literary critical view. For a short section of text, there is a lot to see here. Firstly, it is worth noting that Proust uses this scene, which is essentially a moment of physical departure, for the staging of a social departure and social exclusion. This is to say that the physical movements along the paths of the Bois and of Paris embody the social interactions, which is where the real travel is here. Swann leaves the Verdurin group at the end of their party in the Bois de Boulogne and never returns. Essentially, what Proust is doing here is creating a mirroring effect between the different levels of the action, the literal and metaphorical, the immediate and the larger scale of implication. We see this time and again in the search. A specific act of movement or setting is not arbitrary, but is rather used as a staging for a related crisis or emotional moment, the immediate seeing itself reflected in the top level of narrative implication. As Swann walks back to his house through the Bois de Boulogne, talking to himself and raging against the Verdurins and the little clan, we can observe another of the great themes of Proust's text at work. Something I would like to call the mutability of social truths. Driven by his jealousy, his perspectives on the social interactions of the clan and the qualities of its members change. On page 289 we read how, to him now, in his jealousy, the jokes that had, quote, amused him were now fetid humour and nauseating. On pages 290 and 291 he then re-evaluates their social positions within a reorganised social hierarchy, so that the Verdurin circle becomes, quote, Dante's last circle. In this passage, Proust is showing us once again, in a new form, that our views of people are not based upon them. Their view, the value of their conversation, their qualities, both moral and social, are not intrinsic or based on any ontological necessity. Rather, they are imposed from without. Here the qualities of the Verdurins are determined by Swann's desire, which is to say the extent to which people facilitate his meetings with Odette, and then by his jealousy, as they bar him from his love. This mutability of truth is shown perfectly in the moment that Dr. Cottard learns of Swann's exclusion from the group. Cottard is told that Swann is dull, stupid and ill-mannered on page 291. The doctor is shocked when told this. The narrator tells us that he was, quote, confronted with a new truth, contrary to everything he had believed up to then, but irresistibly obvious. This truth, unobserved by Cottard, the doctor who examines his patients for signs of their condition, is now rendered obvious to him as a truth universally acknowledged, despite its just coming into existence on the basis of social mobility and machination. The truths assigned to us in our social interactions, changeable and imposed from without, are like so many masks. This is reflected in the 6-page passage we're walking through today in the references to smiles. Caught in the arrangements for an evening without him, Swann notices that Madame Verdurin has an innocent smile, but is aware of the, quote, constraint of her smile. Then, after the act of exclusion, when Odette is whisked away from him, we are told that he tried to smile, but looked crushed. A crucial moment in this passage comes when we learn that the pianist is to play the Moonlight Sonata at the party to which Swann is not invited, and in the dark at that. This piece is one of our important signposts along this part of the Proustian Paths. It certainly stands in opposition to, in fact is deliberately set up in contradistinction from, the Vinteuil Sonata. As we have discussed, this latter piece embodies within itself the love between Swann and Odette. We saw in the previous episode how very recently in their affair, Swann had demanded that the work that was the national anthem of their love now act as, quote, a confidant that would tell Odette to pay no heed to Forcheville. That's on page 267. Here, in Swann's imagination, Beethoven's piano sonata is the soundtrack to a different assignation. It is the very music of a sexual promise, that between Odette and Forcheville. In fact, the music, so far as Swann imagines it, encodes and actually produces the new affair. He deems it, alongside the Verdurins, a procuress. Both Madame Verdurin and the music itself are deliberately pushing the new couple together. So the works of Vinteuil and Beethoven point in different directions along the paths of Swann's love. After reading through this passage of departures, it's time for me to take my own leaving. As always, it remains for me to say, thanks for joining me on this leg of our gentle literary walk. If you've enjoyed the journey, again please do consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a review. Also, don't forget that you can subscribe to the Proustian Paths Substack newsletter for free and read all of my further reflections on life and literature, starting from Proust's texts. Finally, if you'd like to support me and the channel, you can do so over on ko-fi.com. Just visit ko-fi.com/Proustian Paths. Your support in this way is entirely optional and will always be massively appreciated. I look forward to you joining me on the next section of our walk along the Proustian Paths.